I'm Tim Ventura, and we're joined today by Dr. Nachum Plonka, the principal data scientist at the HeartMath Institute. He's the primary analyst for HeartMath's wealth of data, from heart rate metrics to highly sensitive geomagnetic measurements, and the lead researcher for the Global Consciousness Project 2.0. Dr. Plonka received his Ph.D. in computational physics from Stanford University, studying quantum materials and publishing in high-profile journals. He then worked as a senior data scientist at Quantifind before joining HeartMath. His passion for science, coupled with daily meditation and consciousness practices, informs his empathetic approach to research and data analysis. So, Nachum, welcome. It is a true pleasure and honor to have you with me today.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited. So where we go.
Today, we're going to talk about the Global Consciousness Project 2.0, which, as I'm learning, is part of a much larger project, the Global Coherence Initiative that HeartMath has. And I am at least one of your top fans, if not your number one fan. I love the work that you guys are doing. It is data focused. It is hard science. You're taking on emerging topics and doing amazing database research on them. So it's absolutely wonderful. Let me start with kind of an overview for the audience. The original Global Consciousness Project was started by Dr. Roger Nelson back in 1988 and ran measurements for decades to detect interactions between consciousness and physical systems by detecting a change in the output of random number generators that correlated with major news events. Is that kind of a good way to describe GCP?
Yeah, I mean, there's many ways. That's a nice way to put it in a nutshell. And, if I would take a crack at it, I would say we are trying to we're trying to kind of bring people's attention and insight towards the experience or concept that our consciousness is more kind of power and influence than we realize. So our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions can impact what's around us in a direct way. And we try to bring people's attention to this by demonstrating through our random number generator network that when there's, for example, mass attention or emotion on some big news event, the network will also show a coherence just similar to the humanities coherence. Of course, we can get more into that, but it's a way of detecting coherence and humanity impacting our surroundings. And then hopefully that filters down to the individual, and they realize, oh, okay, so if I'm happy, that impacts people and things around me in ways I didn't even expect. So and hopefully that they end up towards sort of HeartMath's mission of people getting along, being mindful of how they are, being caring towards others, so it further inspires them.
Okay. So the original Global Consciousness Project has ended, but your organization at HeartMath has essentially resurrected it and, in fact, improved greatly on the original design as part of, again, the Global Coherence Initiative. So I do want to jump in, again, for the audience's sake, and ask if you could tell me a bit about HeartMath, the organization, the Global Coherence Initiative that we touched briefly on, and also yourself. How did you come on board with the organization?
Yeah. So I feel like in my previous response, I want to do a little more justice to the original Global Consciousness Project, as you're asking. And again, we can go as deep or as not as we want, but Dr. Roger Nelson, who I know you've interviewed a few times, was the founder of that. And did great work to really prove out over the course of 20+ years that there is a real effect here that we can scientifically and statistically prove or show. It's very hard to use the word prove in science, but show very strong evidence. And it's because of the original project that we have confidence that we're gonna see in this new GCP 2.0, the Global Consciousness Project 2.0, we're gonna see some real results and are already starting to see hints at that. So let's see. So HeartMath, HeartMath kind of inherited that project from Dr. Nelson, and he still likes to be involved in GCP 2.0. And we picked it up, as you mentioned, GCI. That's our umbrella that caught this project. So the Global Coherence Initiative, and this is this broader initiative where we're looking for interconnectivity among various aspects, data sources, how you want to go about it. But we have the HeartMath, in the name is heart, and that's one of our primary metrics, the heart rate variability we measure in people and how people regulate. We also measure the magnetic field of the Earth, and there are studies that show that these two, our human hearts and the Earth's magnetic field, are interacting with each other. And furthermore, there's trees, there's a global tree project, and we're hooking up trees with sensors that can measure their electric field, just like a heart creates an electromagnetic field. So that's all we expect connected. And there's some really cool research about trees' electric fields in leading universities. And finally, here, today we're focusing on the Global Consciousness Project 2.0. That is the kind of newest addition to the whole set of data that we've been collecting. Again, all connected, all about how these different parts, these different aspects of our experience of our planet are interwoven and interconnected with each other. And so this network of RNGs, short for random number generators, that we have in GCP 2.0 are also connected to human sentiment, the way that people are interacting with the world around them.
Well, again, I am and I have been a tremendous fan of the Global Consciousness Project for 20 years now. And along with a few of my colleagues, I signed up for the GCP 2.0 project. I am currently hosting one of the new random number generators from HeartMath. I'm going to put a link in the show notes for anyone else who wants to host those. I know that some areas of the network are quote unquote full, but you're still looking for RNGs. I believe in the New York and Los Angeles areas. The device is not free, right? It's something that people have to buy. I paid for it. My colleagues paid for it. And my hope was that by contributing to this, the data that my device produces will feed into a larger network that will benefit everyone, right? So this isn't like a Tim thing. This is, Tim participating in a larger project, right? And my hope is that other people might do the same. The thing that excites me so much about it is it seems like in terms of consciousness, or what some people might call psychic powers, or demonstrating the power of the mind to connect with the physical environment, there's been this stalemate in science for decades, right? Where we have lots of subjective data and evidence that this happens. But scientifically speaking, it has been very difficult to change minds and open perspectives on it. And the data that your network is generating seems like one of those tiebreakers where we're actually able to say, look, this is something that is objectively and quantifiably proving an effect, rather than simply, doing studies that show subjective evidence. Would you agree with that?
I think I think that I'm trying to think how close, but it's definitely, I think the short answer is yes. We are we are, you know, bringing all the rigor that we can to something like this, knowing that it's a new and young area of science, and there's still there are challenges. We're trying to wrap our hands around something so big, you know, and so even if it weren't a controversial area in the scientific community, when you're trailblazing, it's hard to catch all the pieces that you're supposed to catch. You're really trying to get the big picture and prove, you know, what you can. You know, so yeah, we are bringing the objective science to it, and it's this kind of thing that kind of brought me to HeartMath as well. And that I hope encourages others as well to get engaged, as you were mentioning. So, like for me, my background is very technical. Also, it's very this scientific. I'm Ph.D. in Stanford, as you mentioned, computational physics, and I've been very technically and scientifically oriented since I was a kid, and I was computer coding in 4th grade and all these sorts of things. So always a scientist. But as I got older and started to really ask myself deeper questions, what's going on, what's sort of the meaning in life, that kind of brought me to that other side, the meditation and interest in consciousness. And that kind of led me into HeartMath, where I wanted to bring the heart and the math together, those two parts of me. That's
a wonderful description of growth. And actually, it reminded me, in my own case, not exactly the same, but I came up working with machines, right? And started out in the tech industry, you know, programming, design, software companies, the whole 9 yards. And over time, came to appreciate and value people far more than machines. As strange as that may sound, I'm not sure how it happened, but what I found was that the more that I worked with machines, the more I ended up valuing human relationships. So it's interesting to see parallels, I guess, in what you're describing, coming at it from a physics perspective, and then just growing right into consciousness and self-discovery and expanding your horizons.
Yeah. And I hope that that other people as well, we call it the citizen scientists, right? They, you know, you don't have to be professionally trained as a scientist to be a citizen scientist. It's really having that science inquiry of trying to find meaning in what's around you. And so as you find as people feel drawn to find meaning, hopefully one of the ways they can do that is by engaging with the Global Consciousness Project 2.0, where you have, as you mentioned, you can host a device. You mentioned LA, New York, but really all around the world. I think in America, it's getting a little impacted because we're getting a lot of requests. But we're definitely, you know, we are building them. We're selling them like hotcakes. We're building them as fast as we can sell them, but we want to keep it globally distributed. And so, hopefully that anyway, people get, you know, they can do that. They don't have to buy a device. We have a website, come and, you know, get to that later, but they can engage with the data. They can engage with, you know, ask us questions, and really just get curious and interested. I think that's the main thing HeartMath wants. I mean, we're a nonprofit. We're not trying to like make a lot of money off this. We're trying to raise people's awareness and hopefully help them live better lives.
Yeah. Well, and I hope I didn't come across like I was doing a sales pitch earlier, you know, I was going to add to that, to my non-sales pitch. I should add that the build quality was amazing. The device that I have up in the house, I was surprised because you know, HeartMath is, you know, it's not like an Apple computer, right? This is a smaller firm. And so I thought, well, this could be like an electronics project, but as long as it works, it counts. and the quality was amazing, absolutely amazing. So the fact that you guys are building those, I mean, that's a tremendous testament to, the hard work, ingenuity, and dedication you're putting into it. But yeah, for the audience, it's not a one-to-one benefit, right? So I don't have to buy one of these to benefit from it. As long as the network is big enough, everyone benefits from it. So I think that's
Right.
probably the key point, right?
Yeah, I think yeah, because it's 1,000 devices, but we want to affect way more people than 1,000, right? And we could see that already, the way that people are engaging with this project. So yeah, and it's about what the network can do, what the data is picking up on, right? And the way that we are behaving around the world. So it's a sort of a detector, and that is information that anyone can benefit from.
Yeah. Now, the random number generators being used are controlled by reverse biased Zener diodes that rely on quantum tunneling. And again, in the GCP 2.0 network, each of these detectors, right? Each of these devices has, I believe, 6 Zener diodes in it, and they run in parallel, if I understand correctly. And then you're capturing data, you're capturing random number output, which is what Roger Nelson originally used to calculate basically deviance from randomness. And as these news events happen, right? Things like September 11th or the recent invasion of Gaza, those would be negative examples. New Year's would be a positive example, right? As human minds and consciousness focus on these events, there is this amazing change in the randomness of these. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah. So so they actually have, there are 8 diodes in each, but you mentioned 6.
Eight.
Actually,
Okay.
we are actually calculating, there's some research going on for which we're only calculating on 6. So you might have gotten that number, correct in that sense, actually. And yeah, so the network, the size of the network is already, well, we're close to 200 devices out there, I think, and we're going up to 1,000. And as like you said, there's multiple diodes in there. So that translates into actually 4 RNGs, because you pair up the diodes, 4 RNGs in each. So we've got, we're coming up on 700-800 RNGs around the world right now, which is like 10 times the size of the original Global Consciousness Project. And what we're starting to do is we're starting to look at the events like you mentioned. Really, that was the backbone of GCP1, that original project, was to look at a long arc of many events that occurred, and over time build up the statistics to say, that there's trillion to 1 odds that this happened by chance. Like, it's too weird what these devices are doing. This is not random as you'd expect. That's the kind of the basics of a random number generator. It's supposed to spit out just random numbers. And so when you see that, in fact, no, they're coherent with each other, and they're actually not random, and you see that over and over many events, this consistent effect, then you really have very strong evidence. So we're doing that in GCP 2.0. We're starting, the network only really started expanding in size earlier this year. But I think I would call it, we're in an exploratory phase. We're trying out different events. We're seeing what the network looks like. Some of them looks interesting, some doesn't look so interesting, but we have intuition from that original project, and we know there's something in there. And so we can already start to say, okay, this looks suggestive. I think, I look at one event, even the original project, Dr. Nelson's always saying, don't read too much into what we see in the network in just one event, because that's not really rigorous statistics, but we've got enough basis to say, hey, there's something there. So you mentioned events like, we looked at the day when right at the beginning of the conflict in the Middle East, right? The day when the Hamas went into Israel and then Israel counterstrike. And so there's definitely some suggestive evidence there. We've looked at Libya floods. We've looked at like really the big news events, as well as like peaceful meditations. Global Peace Day has always been popular to look at. That's the 21st of September every year. There's a lot of meditation around the world. And, there's also like, we can talk about more focused events we've been trying, because we have certain hypotheses at HeartMath about that as well. Yeah, so there's so many directions I can go here, but I'll toss the ball back to you and see where you want to go with this.
Well, again, you just to focus down on it, the Zener diodes generate truly quantum random events, right? And it's based on the quantum nature of it. If I remember correctly, Roger described these as, when it's reverse biased, electrons pile up and eventually tunnel through the diode. And that tunneling process, the rate at which that happens, is quantum in nature, right? So they produce this effectively truly random, fundamentally random noise, that random on a quantum level, and that is what the RNGs are based on. So in a very fundamental way, these are truly random. They're not pseudo-random number generators like people use in computers. Computer science people like yourself, right, and many of my listeners would know, random number generators in a computer aren't truly random. They're always based on some kind of an algorithm, and so there's always some kind of a framework to it. This is not the same. These are truly random, and yet, as you mentioned, the strike, counterstrike in the Middle East, in Gaza, things like that, things like meditation events that you mentioned, things like holidays, things that bring together human consciousness so that we're all thinking about the same thing, affect the output of these. To me, that is so amazing. I have no idea why. I'm not sure if anyone else does either. Do you have any thoughts on why that might happen?
Yeah, it's such a good question. It's, as a scientist, we always ask why, like what, so this really weird thing's happening, but how do I explain that? So from a technical side, I would say the leading theories are either quantum mechanics or electromagnetic. Even as you said, that it's quantum random, but then in the process of how we interact with it, that is still open to, that doesn't have to be quantum. It could be electromagnetic.
Oh,
and
okay.
there's a lot of HeartMath research leading up to this actually has been more focused on the electromagnetic, right? The magnetic field and the hearts and the trees. So we've been looking at those kind of interactions as well. But the jury is definitely still out on these RNGs. One of the things I like to say about it is, so I was trained in my PhD, I was in high temperature superconductivity. And this is one of, at least, this is, I believe it still is one of the largest areas of research in physics. And it's been going on for decades. And, lots of smart people are working on it. And we know that high temperature superconductivity happens, but we don't know why. We don't, so that's just and obviously they're much more developed there than they are in this nascent field of GCP 2.0. But I remember people would just like comment in all ways. So the message there is that science and research, it's always great to ask why and to be curious and to be open that we don't know why, and we got to just keep trying things and keep trying to figure it out. And we kind of celebrate our wins. It's like, at least I understand that this thing happens, even if I don't totally get why. And then we begin to build theories around it. And here's a theory, and here's a theory, and now we bring some evidence for this one and that one, and it's, and then people go at it and like, well, I think it's that, and sort of healthy, working out these issues. So yeah, so it's an open question, but I will say that we have designed this project to hopefully address it in a way that's not been before, because we have built these RNGs to track the physics of what's going on inside, not just to store the random numbers that come out at the end of the whole process, but to actually get as close to that quantum process in the diode, which is a voltage in the circuit, and say, what's that number? Okay, now what's that number? And to track that as the random numbers come out, what are the voltages? And even to track steps between that. And so hopefully we have more fingers on the pulse of what's going on in there. And I think it's still going to be a challenge, but I'm really hoping we can get more information about what is going on in there.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to bring up was, yeah, in addition to tracking the random numbers, you're actually tracking the signal from the diodes themselves. And then all of this is being stored in a central database, right, where you can do comparative analysis on it and metrics. And so there's a lot of data there. I should ask about the data because that must be an absolute nightmare to manage all of that. How much data is being generated by this?
I want to say it's always growing, because the more and more devices we get on the network, the more it grows. And I remember, we threw around certain numbers. I think when the network hits 1,000 devices, it's not an insane amount of data. It's several terabytes per year. So that's workable. But certainly, as I find, with analyses, like, there's definitely levels where I can, and setting up the, as we're setting up, we're watching, oh, this is slowing down. Okay, we got to optimize this. This is slowing, so we're scaling and scaling, and there's lots of moving parts. There's the cloud, there's the website that's using the data. And then as a researcher also, getting in there, experimenting with small chunks of data, coming up with ideas, running it on bigger chunks of data. So there's a lot of, that's sort of my data science background coming in there to juggle the data, to find insights. And but it's fun. There's definitely a lot there. And I will say also HeartMath in general, like I mentioned, there's several data sources, and I'm the only sort of real data analyst at HeartMath. We definitely have a small research team, and everyone sort of pokes around. But I've come, as I've joined HeartMath, a few years ago, I've come to see, okay, we do a great job of producing really quality data, but we also really encourage people outside the organization to get involved with it. We have researchers, we have MIT researchers and Harvard, and people from all over who want this data that HeartMath gives, and we're like, great, we need all the help that we can get to look at this data, because we've put in a ton of work into that data generation, and then the data analysis is like, there's only so much I can do as one person. So yeah. And I love helping people kind of get set up with that.
Well, that was actually on my list of things I wanted to ask. If people like university researchers or postgrads or the general public, people with computer experience, especially people with data analysis skills, wanted to get involved, they could reach out to you through HeartMath, right?
That's right. Yeah. And we start a conversation, maybe a Zoom call, maybe they really know exactly what they want, and we can help them with that. And we are, at the moment, that's quite a manageable way to go about it. And another thing we're automating, as we see more and more people get engaged, we're hoping to have a little more automated process around, if you want to get some data, you don't necessarily have to send an email and go back and forth, right? Hopefully we're going to have some process to let lots of people maybe be able to download some of that data. But that's future, that's in the coming months. So for now, it's email us and see what we can do.
Well, So in the analysis that you've done so far, I wanted to ask about a couple of different things. I've asked Roger about these, but I wanted to ask you because you are doing data analysis. Have you seen precursors to events? That should be one thing I wanted to ask. For instance, in the Israel Gaza in the back and forth strikes that happened a few weeks ago, did you see any indications beforehand of a change? Right, and then um, I also wanted to ask if there was any geographic, y what would you call it, localization to these. For instance, like, I'm not sure if you had any devices in the Middle East, but would a device in the Middle East register that more strongly than one that might be in, New York or out in the Seattle area where I am?
Yeah, those are two great questions. And I would say, I feel like those are both open research questions that are high on our list. And it's great that you anchored it kind of in an actual world event that's going on. I feel like that helps people think about it. And then I always have the challenge that once you get real nitty gritty like that, you're going to have a hard time probably extracting that information from just one event. What we would do is we would take several similar events and average those and see, on average, is there a precursor? On average, is there localization? And those are things we want to ask and do. So, but I know that there's definitely been some evidence already, as you mentioned, Dr. Nelson, original Global Consciousness Project. There's definitely been evidence there. He just recently, he tipped me off. He said, hey, if you're looking at that earthquake that just happened, devastating earthquake in Morocco, happened just recently, give it 1 or 2 hours before, because earthquakes, we tend to see some precursor over there. It happens to look, the data is more significant when you do that. And again, I'm not going to draw too much conclusion from one event, but interesting. That strengthens that hypothesis. In terms of localization, I would say we're definitely interested in that. People ask about it all the time. And we do believe that there is, again, there's not strong, from the original Global Consciousness Project, I don't believe there was strong enough evidence that happens. I believe that there was like suggestive evidence from what I've seen there. But enough that, again, that's a strong hypothesis for us to check. And for example, that's why we have what are called cluster cities. You mentioned New York and LA. We're planning on having in each of those 20 devices, right? With 4 RNGs each, all in the same city. We actually have in the Middle East, we have one slowly building up over there. We have them 25 different cities all around the world. And so we are going to try to see, because it's hard sometimes with just one device, but see if those clusters light up, right? When an event that's local happens, and see if, like you said, is there even a wave of it or something? Is it traveling out from there? Is that following the way it goes on in the news? Is that some other phenomenon that's faster than the news? Who knows? But that's a cool thing, because we do believe that if an event is centered somewhere, that there's some localization, and we're trying to get our finger on that one.
This is so intriguing. Another question that came to my mind, and it's one that bounces around in my brain. I don't have any answers. I don't even have any solid ideas, but I have wondered, measuring the direct effect of consciousness on real physical systems, to me seems very similar to some kind of independent measurement of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and the observer effect, right? I mean, this goes to the heart of Schrodinger's cat. The cat is in the box with the radioactive poison in it, right? And the cat is in this overlapping state of being both alive and dead until the box is opened and it's measured. So that idea, that thought experiment, was saying that consciousness is the deciding factor, right? You have this superposition of states that, and quantum computing, I believe, proves that exists in the real world. I wonder if the Global Consciousness Project in GCP 2.0 are directly measuring the observer effect and perhaps validating Heisenberg's uncertainty principle in yet a new way.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always loved quantum mechanics since I was in physics, and I first had no idea what was going on with it the first year I learned about it in university. But then, you bang your head against it enough times, and it was just so bizarre that I just loved it. Loved understanding it and being like, wow, this is real. Um, the I hope, yeah, I believe that this project is addressing, in some way could be addressing this. And this is another research question. It's another one it can be hard to tease out. But there is this, the accepted quantum mechanics around observer effect is that if I observe something, it has to, like if it'll be in some, alive or dead, whatever it is. And it has to, like, I can't observe an alive and dead cat. Like, so when I observe it,
Yeah.
it's got to be one. I think the piece that we're pushing the edge of here is not only does it like have to decide, so to speak, but we influence that decision. Our consciousness influences it, or perhaps a larger consciousness, but that's the extra ingredient, the taking it from maybe it's sort of like from attention to intention, but it's like something's going on in us that may be influencing which way, if that cat is alive or dead. Like maybe we killed it with our consciousness, sadly. So we're hoping that with RNGs, picking up on this effect, on this consciousness, that perhaps, again, this comes down to if it's quantum mechanics that is influencing the devices, is it electromagnetism? And I'm going to throw in here, it's probably some of both, right? Because usually that's kind of the way things go. If it's this or that in physics, I forget what professor once always said, if it's not forbidden, it must be so, or something. So there's probably some of each of those in there. And so it seems then that these devices are having that observer effect plus intention plus consciousness going on in them. And it's for us to figure out how and in what way that's happening.
Well, these are how the big new effects are discovered, and these are how theories are expanded. It always comes from something that's outside of the norm, right? And in mainstream physics, they have been in love with atom smashers since the 1930s. And so the solution to everything is predict a new particle, smash some atoms, we'll see if we can find it. And one of the things that I love about GCP is that you're approaching things from a completely different perspective. And that is where the big breakthroughs come from, right? And so these, novel effects and these correlations that exist but can't exactly be explained today may form the basis for, who knows, extensions to quantum mechanics tomorrow as they're better understood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I would love to see that happen. I can imagine there are definitely hurdles to that, but I would love to see us. I mean, HeartMath, I think HeartMath is well positioned for this because we're one of those organizations that forays off into some of these more controversial topics, but really stays grounded in the science. We publish in the leading journals and everything, and we take that seriously. So I'm really hoping that we can find something well-founded and bring the scientific community, shift them a little in this direction. And especially if it comes within we're using the same formalism and the same language, quantum mechanics, and we don't just throw it around as like, oh, quantum, whatever, but we're like, here are the formulas, here's the way, hopefully this is something that becomes more mainstream, because it's in a way, science is often like that. Science is, Copernicus, Galileo, like the Earth is not the center of the universe, things like that. People say you're crazy, and they've never thought of it that way, and they don't want to. And science at the edge, at the forefront, has to push the boundaries of what we're not always comfortable with, what is really not familiar. And one day the hope is, just like it has happened in the past, people will say, now it sounds all woo, but it's, and whatever decades from now, people will be like, yeah, oh yeah, I picked up that. Yeah, I picked up the fork with I was just thinking about it. Yeah, I brought it over there, like normal conversation, that
Yeah.
could be, and no one thinks it's magic. It's just, we're used to it.
Absolutely. Well, quantum mechanics itself is like that, and much of our technology is like that, right? I mean, the idea of the smartphone and what it can do would be mind-blowing. I remember when I was a kid, everybody wanted the Star Trek communicator, right? How far beyond that are we now? We have something that is the same size, or in many cases smaller, that can do 1,000 times more than you ever saw with one of those little Star Trek flip communicators. And that's normal. Everyone on the planet has one of those, you know? So that's just one example of hundreds where, research on a daily basis adds up to paradigm change. And I think Global Consciousness Project and the work that you guys are doing absolutely is on that path. Nachum, let me thank you so much for your time today. It has been truly a pleasure and an honor having you with me. I would love to have you back in the future to give us updates on how the Global Consciousness Project 2.0 is going. And I'm going to drop links in the show notes, and I'm going to try and get more people involved. They can see current status of these devices on the website. And I know that you guys are working on overhauling the website as well. I want to close by asking, what comes next for you? What do you see yourself engaged with in the next few months? And where is the project going in the near future?
Yeah. Yeah, the project, I feel like, is right at an inflection point. Like, it's taking off. We spent a couple years in design, really getting things right. Letting some of our closest confidants kind of come in and say, "Hey, we're working on this. Any feedback, input?" But now the devices are out there. It's, as of a few months ago, it's taking off. People are buying them and hosting them and setting them up, and they're starting to engage more. And I see it. I see I'm starting to get more questions and more engagement. So in the next few months, I really see I think that the network is going to take off. I'm hoping we start to have some research, some more kind of established research that we can start to show people. We're going to have that new website. We're going to have it up there. We're going to have more live data available than is there now. So I think the project's really blooming and taking off, and I'm just excited to see where it goes, and really appreciative that you've had me here and interviewed me. I think this is a great medium also to get people engaged and to let people know, and hopefully change humanity.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for your time today as well, sir.
Thank you, Tim.